I never planned to see any of them again. 5 years of silence, building a life they knew nothing about. Then Dad's lawyer called about the funeral. I almost hung up, but something made me listen. Your presence is requested for the reading of the will. My father, who disowned me for loving the wrong man, had included me after all. I remember standing at the back of the church, a stranger in a sea of familiar faces. My mother's gasp when she spotted me, my brother's wide eyes. None of them knew what was coming. None of them knew that Dad had been secretly meeting with me for the past 2 years, or that he'd changed everything in those final months. The executor cleared his throat and began to read. That's when the room went absolutely silent. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't planned at all. It's simply the truth finally coming to light. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, the Marshall name meant something. Dad built his real estate empire from nothing, and he never let us forget it. Our colonial-style home, with its manicured lawn and heated pool, was the backdrop for countless business dinners where Mom played the perfect hostess, and my brother Jake and I were trotted out like trophies. Emma has straight A's and just made concert pianist, Dad would announce, his hand heavy on my shoulder. I'd smile on cue while mentally counting the minutes until I could escape. Those dinners were performance art. We were the American dream family on display. Behind closed doors was different. Dad ruled with impossible standards. When I was 12, I performed Chopin at a charity gala. One wrong note. That's all it took. Marshalls don't make mistakes, he hissed in the car afterward. The piano lessons I once loved became a battlefield. I practiced until my fingers cramped because disappointing Charles Marshall wasn't an option. Jake had it worse. His dyslexia was treated like a character flaw rather than a learning difference. Try harder was Dad's solution to everything. While I could occasionally meet Dad's expectations, Jake rarely could. He started drinking in high school, and by college, he was in and out of rehab facilities. Always the discreet ones where New England money could buy privacy. Mom was no ally. Caroline Marshall, former beauty queen turned country club queen, had perfected the art of selective blindness. "Your father wants what's best," she'd say, refilling her wine glass. Her own identity had been so thoroughly absorbed into Dad's that I'm not sure she remembered who she was before becoming Mrs. Charles Marshall. Then I met Eli during my senior year at Yale. He worked at the campus coffee shop and was putting himself through school. Brilliant, kind, with a laugh that made everything lighter. He was also the son of Lebanese immigrants who owned a small grocery store in New Haven. His family was warm, loud, and welcomed me instantly. Friday dinners at the Nasser home became my sanctuary. When Eli proposed after graduation, I knew what was coming. Still, I brought him home, hoping for a miracle. A shopkeeper's son? Dad didn't even try to hide his disgust. "I didn't pay for Yale so you could throw yourself away. He's getting his master's in education. He wants to teach." Even worse, Mom chimed in, "Teachers make nothing, Emma." The dinner was disastrous. Eli tried so hard, answering their condescending questions with grace. But when Dad suggested he might do better somewhere else than our social circle, Eli stood up. "I love your daughter, Mr. Marshall. Nothing else should matter." Dad's response was cold. "That's where you're wrong. Everything else matters." 2 weeks later, Dad presented his grand gesture, a position at his friend's investment firm in London and a condo overlooking the Thames. A graduation gift, he called it, and a chance to meet suitable men. I declined. He gave me an ultimatum. "Choose this relationship, and you're cut off. No money, no family, nothing." What he didn't know was that Grandma Rose, his own mother, who had passed 3 years earlier, had left me a small inheritance in a private account. Not life-changing money, but enough for a down payment on a modest house and to help Eli finish school. She'd always seen through Dad's facade. "You'll regret this," Dad warned when I packed my things. Mom cried but did nothing. Jake was absent, in rehab again. I walked away that day, not knowing it would be 5 years before I'd set foot in that house again. The call about Dad's heart attack came on a Tuesday morning. I was grading papers in my home office. I'd followed Eli into education, teaching music at a public high school in Portland, Oregon. We'd built a life 3,000 miles from Connecticut, with friends who knew nothing of trust funds or country clubs. "Emma, it's Jake." His voice was rough, like he'd been crying. "Dad's gone. Heart attack at the office." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, waiting for emotion to hit. Grief, relief, something. Instead, I felt numb. "The funeral's Saturday," Jake continued. "Mom wants you there." "Does she?" 5 years of silence suggested otherwise. "Please, Em, I can't do this alone." There was a desperation in Jake's voice I hadn't heard before. He was sober now, 3 years, according to the Christmas card he'd sent against our parents' wishes. I almost said no. Then Mr. Calloway, Dad's attorney, called the next day. "Your father amended his will 6 months ago, Miss Marshall. He requested your presence at the reading immediately following the service." Why would he do that? He disowned me. There was a pause. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the contents, but I believe you'll want to be there." Something in his tone made me book a flight. Eli insisted on coming with me. "They don't get to hurt you again," he said, packing his suit. We were married now, with a simple band on my finger instead of the massive diamond Dad would have expected. The Marshall house hadn't changed. Same imposing facade, same perfect roses Mom tended obsessively. The driveway was lined with luxury cars as mourners arrived for the pre-funeral reception. Mom spotted us first as we entered. She'd aged, grief etching new lines around her eyes. For a moment, her face brightened. "Emma." She moved toward me, arms outstretched, then froze when she saw Eli. Her expression hardened. "You brought him?" "My husband, yes." I held Eli's hand tighter. Jake rescued us, appearing with drinks and a genuine hug. "Thank God you came," he whispered. The living room was filled with Dad's business associates, golf buddies, and the social circle he'd valued so highly. I recognized many faces, people who'd watched me grow up, who knew Dad had cut me off, who now whispered behind manicured hands. "That's the daughter, the one who married the foreigner." Charles never got over the disappointment. Mom played her role perfectly, accepting condolences with dignified sniffles. Charles was taken too soon, so much left unfinished. I stayed in the background, observing this world I'd once belonged to. Aunt Patricia, Dad's sister, approached with her usual air of superiority. "Well, Emma, I suppose you think you can just waltz back in now that your father's gone." "I was invited, Aunt Patricia." Her gaze slid to Eli with barely concealed disdain. "And how is life among the commoners?" Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A woman I didn't recognize had arrived, early 40s, elegantly dressed, but clearly uncomfortable. Mom's face went white. "Who invited her?" she hissed to Jake. "No idea," he muttered, but something in his expression suggested otherwise. The mystery woman made no move to approach Mom, instead finding a corner to occupy, much like me. Our eyes met briefly across the room. There was something familiar about her face. At the church, I sat in the back row with Eli. The service was exactly what Dad would have wanted. Prominent speakers extolling his business acumen, his philanthropy, his legacy. Not one person mentioned his temper, his rigid expectations, his conditional love. The unknown woman sat a few rows ahead, alone. Twice, I caught Jake glancing back at her. After the service, Mr. Calloway gathered the family in Dad's study for the reading. Mom looked surprised when the attorney invited the mystery woman to join us. "This is a family matter," Mom protested. "Mrs. Marshall, Miss Jensen's presence was explicitly requested by your husband." Mom's lips pressed into a thin line as the woman, Miss Jensen, took a seat across from us. The tension in the room was suffocating. Mr. Calloway adjusted his glasses. Before I begin, Mr. Marshall recorded a video statement to be played at this time. The attorney placed a laptop on Dad's desk and pressed play. Dad's face filled the screen, thinner than I remembered, with more gray in his hair. He looked directly at the camera, and I felt a chill, as if he were staring at me from beyond the grave. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I've run out of time to make things right in person." Dad's face on the screen looked tired, different from the imperious man I remembered. "I've made mistakes," he continued, "the kind a man doesn't recognize until it's almost too late." Mom shifted uncomfortably beside me. Jake stared at his hands. "Emma," Dad addressed me directly, making me flinch. "When you left, I told myself it was your failure, not mine. I was wrong." His voice cracked slightly. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with heart disease. Facing mortality has a way of clarifying what matters. I felt Eli's hand tighten around mine as Dad continued. "I hired a private investigator to find you. I watched your house in Portland from my car for 3 days before I found the courage to knock on your door." Gasps filled the room. Mom turned to me, shock evident on her face. "You saw him?" she whispered. I nodded slowly, remembering that rainy afternoon when I'd opened the door to find my father standing there, looking smaller than I remembered. On screen, Dad continued. "Emma didn't slam the door in my face, though she had every right to. Instead, she invited me in for coffee. We talked for hours. I met her husband." Dad paused, a small smile forming. "I met Eli, who is everything I was too blind to see. A good man who loves my daughter." Mom's face had gone from shock to betrayal. "You never told me," she hissed. "You never asked," Dad replied from the screen, as if anticipating her reaction. "For 2 years, I flew to Portland every month. I watched Emma teaching music to children who adore her. I had Shabbat dinner with Eli's family, who showed me what real family support looks like." The mystery woman, Miss Jensen, was crying silently now. "Which brings me to my other great failure," Dad said, his voice growing heavier. "Rebecca Jensen." All eyes turned to the woman. 30 years ago, before I met Caroline, Rebecca and I were engaged. When she became pregnant, I panicked. I was building my business, ambitious, selfish. I paid her to disappear, to handle the problem. She took the money, but couldn't go through with the abortion. The room went deathly quiet. Rebecca raised our daughter alone. Megan is 29 now, with a daughter of her own, my granddaughter. Dad's voice broke. A family I denied for decades, just as I tried to deny Emma her happiness. Mom stood up abruptly. "This is absurd. Charles, what are you saying?" Dad seemed to look right through the screen at her. "I'm saying I've lived a lie, Caroline, and so have you. We both know our marriage hasn't been real since Jake was born." Jake's head snapped up. "I'm saying," Dad continued, "that I've amended my will to reflect the family I almost lost, not just the image I cultivated." Mr. Calloway paused the video and cleared his throat. At this point, I should read the actual provisions of the will. "No need," Mom said, her voice ice cold. "I think we all see where this is going." She glared at me, then at Rebecca Jensen. "You two planned this. You turned him against me in his final months." I stood up, years of suppressed anger finally breaking free. "I didn't turn anyone against you, Mom. You did that yourself when you sat silently while he threw me away for loving the wrong person. When you chose status over your own daughter. You have no idea what I've sacrificed." "Actually, I do," I interrupted. "You sacrificed authenticity, backbone, and any real connection with your children. You and Dad built this perfect facade while ignoring what actually matters." Jake stood beside. "Me? She's right, Mom. You chose his approval over us every time. And you," she turned on Jake, You knew about this. This woman and her daughter? Jake nodded. Dad introduced us last year. Megan's great, actually. You might like her if you bother to try. Mom looked around the room, finding no allies. I won't stand for this humiliation. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, pausing beside me. When you've lost everything, don't come crawling back. The irony of her words, the same ones Dad had said to me years ago, wasn't lost on anyone. After she left, Mr. Calloway resumed the video. My estate is to be divided as follows, Dad stated. 40% to Emma Marshall Nassar, 25% to Jake Marshall, 25% to Megan Jensen and a trust for her daughter. The remaining 10% to Rebecca Jensen, along with an overdue apology. The video ended with Dad looking directly at the camera. I hope someday you can forgive me for taking so long to see what truly matters. The room fell silent as Mr. Calloway closed the laptop. I sat stunned, processing not just the inheritance, but the public acknowledgement, the validation I'd told myself I didn't need. Rebecca Jensen approached me hesitantly. He talked about you constantly these past months. He was so proud of the life you built. I looked at this woman, my father's first failure, just as I had been his last, and saw strength I recognized, the kind that comes from rebuilding after devastation. I think, I said carefully, we have a lot to talk about. The days following the funeral unfolded like scenes from a surreal play. Mom retreated to the Hamptons' house, refusing calls from anyone. The family attorney informed us she was contesting the will, claiming Dad wasn't of sound mind when he made the changes. Her challenge would ultimately fail. Dad had been meticulous, having multiple doctors certify his mental competence. Jake, Rebecca, Megan, and I sat in Dad's study that first evening after everyone else had gone, sharing stories and filling in gaps of our fractured histories. Rebecca showed us old photos. Dad in his 20s, grinning in front of his first real estate office, his arm around a young woman with Megan's eyes. He wasn't always hard, Rebecca said softly. Success changed him. Fear changed him. Fear? I asked. Of losing it all. Of being the poor kid from Bridgeport again. She sighed. When I told him I was pregnant, panic took over. He said a baby would ruin everything he'd worked for. Megan, a pediatric nurse with her father's determined chin, showed me pictures of her 4-year-old daughter, Lily, my niece. The child had Dad's eyes, that Marshall blue that had skipped my generation. He came to her birthday party last year, Megan said, scrolling to a photo of Dad kneeling beside a cake, helping little Lily blow out candles. No one knew who he was. Just an old friend of Mom's, we said. I stared at the image. Dad looking relaxed, happy in a way I'd rarely seen. I can't reconcile that man with the father I knew. People can change, Eli said quietly from beside me, even when we don't think they can. He was right. 2 years ago, when Dad had shown up at our door in Portland, I'd almost sent him away. But something in his eyes, a vulnerability I'd never seen before, made me pause. Our first conversation had been awkward, painful, filled with long silences. He'd struggled to say, "I'm sorry," those words so foreign to his vocabulary. "I don't expect forgiveness," he'd said finally. "I just want to know you." Over months, tentative coffee meetings evolved into real conversations. He asked about my music students, listened when I talked about the rewards of teaching. He never brought up money or status. Once, he even admitted, "I think you found success in ways I never understood." His relationship with Eli had been the biggest surprise. After initial wariness on both sides, they'd found common ground discussing history and politics. Dad had even accepted an invitation to Shabbat dinner with Eli's family, sitting somewhat stiffly at first at the Nassar's table, but eventually relaxing as Eli's mother plied him with homemade baklava and family stories. "Your father called me every week," Eli now told the room, "asked advice about how to approach you," he nodded to Megan. He was trying to learn how to be different. Jake, 3 years sober and steadier than I'd ever seen him, revealed his own reconciliation with Dad. When I finished rehab the last time, he was waiting outside, said he'd been reading about addiction, that he finally understood it wasn't just weakness. Jake's voice caught. He came to every single one of my AA milestones after that. As night deepened, we pieced together the puzzle of Dad's final years, how he'd maintained the facade of his old life while secretly building bridges to a new one, how terminal diagnosis had accelerated his journey toward redemption. He knew Mom would never accept these changes, Jake said. That's why he waited until after. Rebecca nodded. He wanted to spare her the public reckoning while he was alive. Maybe that was cowardice, maybe kindness, probably both. 3 days later, Mr. Calloway called us back to his office. There was more, he explained. Dad had left letters for each of us, to be delivered after we'd had time to process the will. Mine was thick, several pages covered in Dad's precise handwriting. Emma, it began, if you're reading this, I've run out of time to tell you everything I should have said years ago. He wrote about regrets, about the prison of expectations he'd built for himself and tried to force us into, about realizing too late that his definition of success had been hollow. He wrote about watching me teach a piano lesson to a struggling student, the patience I showed, and recognizing that, as true success, making a difference in someone's life. I was wrong about Eli, he wrote, wrong about what makes a worthy partner. I measured by wealth and status because I lacked the courage to measure by character. Your husband has shown me what real strength looks like. The letter ended with a request, not a demand. If you can find it in your heart, please look after Jake. And consider knowing Megan and Lily, not because they're blood, we both know that's not what makes family, but because they're good people who have also been hurt by my failures. You don't have to be a marshal anymore, but perhaps you might all build something new together. 6 months later, that's exactly what we were doing. Jake had moved to Portland, using his portion of the inheritance to open a recovery center. Megan and Lily visited often. Rebecca chose to stay in Connecticut, but called weekly. We were learning to be a family without Dad at the center. Messy, imperfect, but honest. Mom eventually stopped contesting the will, though reconciliation remained distant. She sold the Connecticut house and moved permanently to the Hamptons. Sometimes she called Jake, but never me. Give her time, Jake suggested. She lost everything she thought mattered. No, I corrected him. She lost an illusion. She hasn't figured out what actually matters yet. The most unexpected discovery came in Dad's personal files, detailed plans for a music education foundation with my name listed as director. The Marshall Nasser Foundation for Arts Education, he'd called it, with initial funding of $5 million. He started the paperwork a year ago, Mr. Calloway explained. Everything's in place if you want it. I did. We launched the foundation 3 months after Dad's death, focusing on bringing music education to underserved schools. When we held the opening ceremony, Mom didn't attend, but Jake was there. So were Rebecca, Megan, and little Lily. Eli's parents came too, his mother bringing enough Lebanese sweets to feed everyone twice over. Standing on that stage, looking at this unlikely gathering, this new definition of family, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Not for the money or the validation, but for the chance to see that people can change, even after a lifetime of rigidity. Dad had transformed too late for us to fully heal together, but not too late to show that transformation was possible. As Lily ran circles around Eli's father, who was teaching her Arabic counting songs, I realized we were building something Dad never quite managed: a family based on acceptance rather than expectation. The inheritance that mattered wasn't in the will, after all. It was the understanding that it's never too late to redefine what family means. It's been 2 years since that day in Dad's study when his will turned our worlds upside down. The foundation is thriving, bringing music to kids who remind me of Jake, brilliant but struggling to fit conventional molds. Last month, Mom called me for the first time. The conversation was brief, awkward, but it happened. Small steps. I've learned that family legacy isn't about money or status. It's about the stories we choose to continue and the ones we decide to end. Dad's final act wasn't really about inheritance. It was about giving us all permission to rewrite our stories. Sometimes the greatest act of love is admitting when you've been wrong. If you're trapped in someone else's expectations or carrying the weight of conditional love, remember this: it's never too late to choose your own path. The most powerful inheritance is the courage to live authentically. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family transformations and finding strength in unexpected places. Share in the comments if you've experienced similar family dynamics. You're not alone in this journey. Thanks for listening to my story. Sometimes the things that break us apart are also what eventually bring us back together, just in ways we never imagined.